Welcome back to class time. It's time for CSEC Agricultural Science. I'm Janet White Taylor, and I'll be your guide through today's lesson on housing for farm animals. So students, it's good to be back. I just want to encourage you before going to the lesson to be strong in this difficult time. I know it's not easy, but education for you now is the most important thing, so stay focused. And so today we want to move straight into our lesson, housing for farm animals. At the end of this lesson, students, I hope you'll be able to achieve these objectives. 1, understand the principles that govern the housing requirements for farm animals. Describe appropriate housing and space requirements of broilers and layers. Describe appropriate housing for rabbits and pigs, and describe the establishment of a bee production system. We'll also go through the recap of the lesson, and we're going to look at some past paper questions as well. The first thing we need to know about housing, students, and it doesn't matter the type of animal, we need to know the purpose of that housing. And we want to look at the housing to know that if you're going to build housing for animals, that house must provide protection from bad weather or adverse weather condition, and also protection from predators. We need to understand that the requirements are important. So before we go in to build a house, we need to look at the requirements that we need to put in place. We already went through the purpose. We know that housing for animals must provide protection from adverse weather condition and also from predators. We need to look at other requirements, the location of the house, the site you're going to choose to put that house, the orientation of the house. That means how the house is aligned in an east to west direction or a north to south direction. Ventilation, how air is circulated into the house. Lighting, we're looking at what we call natural daylight in the day or electric light at nights. When we talk about security, we're also referring to predator control. How are we going to make sure that our animals are safe? And you know that in Jamaica, farmers have serious problems or challenges with predial larceny, where some persons like to steal from farmers and actually going to prevent them from making the profit that they should make. Good? We're talking about sanitation. The house for farm animals must be kept clean because you don't want your animals to come down with diseases. Safety, we're talking about biosecurity as well. The materials that you're going to use to make your house, they must be durable and can last for a very long time. And roofing is going to be critical as well because we want to make sure that our animals are protected. So we have just looked at the list of requirements. I now want to go through each of them to ensure that you understand the requirement for the housing for farm animals. Good? So we want to start by looking at the materials. The materials that we're going to use to build our houses for our farm animals, we get those materials either locally or imported materials. Good? So we want to look at lumber, for example. There are some lumber we are going to get locally. For example, our local trees, for example, the pine and cedar, they will give us the local lumber that we need. If we were to look at imported lumber, we are thinking of pitch pine, plywood, and chipboard. We must use the aggregates to ensure that we have a good and a strong foundation. We're talking about gravel, our sand, and cement. When we look at metals now in our region, most of the metals that we use, they are imported material. So when we talk about like our iron and steel beams, those things are important and most of that is imported. When we talk about our roofing material, we are thinking about zinc and aluminum. If we are talking about imported material as well, we are thinking about, in terms of metals, we are thinking of galvanized roofing, sheets, and pipes. And then we have our local PVC pipes. We also, if we're talking about imported materials, the ceramics, we're going to have our tiles, our wash basins, and our sinks. And don't forget that the blocks that we use, we're going to be thinking of those concrete blocks or the clay blocks as well. So materials are important, students. And remember too, farmers, if you're going to be using lumber, if you want those lumber to last for a long time, you have to paint them, and also for your metal and steel as well, because you want those materials to be durable, especially in this weather that we have been having so much rain over the past couple of weeks. Good? Moving on now to look at roofing, because if we want to protect those animals from adverse weather conditions, we must have proper roofing. And these are some roofing we use in our region. We have what we call the shed roofing. Some farmers refer to that as lean-to roof. We have the gable roof. We have monitor roof, gambrel, Gothic roof, and also half monitor. These are just a few examples of the roofing we can put over the house of our farm animals. A next very important requirement is the location where you're going to put your house. We therefore must pay attention to the site, and we have to choose that site carefully. It's important because the site must provide stability of ground. That site must be well drained. It must also not be prone to flooding or landslides. And if you're going to set up house for your cattle, for example, you want to make sure that the house is near to the pasture. So the location plays a very, very important role. You can't just put your farmhouse near to a riverbank, because when there's flooding, you know you're going to be losing your house as well as your animals. And we can't afford to lose anything now, because we want to make sure that our farmers are able to provide for their families and to be able to do the things that they need to do. Let us recap by looking at this revision question. The diagram shows a design of housing for a particular animal. As you look at that house, students, I know you know the animal that should be in that house, right? The type of roof shown in the diagram is the answer A, a hip roof? Is it B, a gable roof? C, a lean-to roof? Or D, an insulated roof? Write down your answers. At the end of the presentation, I want you to match your answers with mine. Good? Because we have covered roofing so far, the purpose of building the house, and we have also looked at the materials and ensuring that we understand these requirements as we go now to look into the other requirements. Good? Are you still following me, students? I hope you are focused even in this time. So let us continue. Let us look at orientation. Orientation is a very important requirement, because we are talking about how the house is going to be aligned. The house must be aligned in a certain direction in the Caribbean, because we want to be able to reduce the buildup of heat inside that house. So when we talk about the alignment, it must give protection from the elements. The house must be aligned east to west and not north to south direction. It should be able to reduce the amount of direct sunlight entering the house and reduces the chilling effect of the northeast trade winds. Good? And so what I want to move on to look at, I want you to see the alignment of a poultry house when it is aligned in the east to west direction or north to south direction. So what I have here is two diagrams, and I call diagram 1A and diagram 2B. So in diagram A, we are seeing this house is aligned in an east to west direction. You want to make sure that you understand that the solid wall to the house is aligned in the east to west direction. We are looking from very early in the morning. The sun comes up in the east, and this sun is going to go straight into that solid wall of this house. And so because we have the solid wall, it is going to take off some of the heat of this house. So the chickens that are inside this house, they are still going to be cool. The sun is going up now. We talk about the 10 o'clock sun. It is still hitting the side of the house and parts of the roof. The chickens inside this house, they are going to be cool and they are not going to start to feel hot. But by the midday sun, that sun is going to hit the roof of that house, and we are now going to start to have buildup of heat in the house. But by the 2 o'clock sun, it's moving away from the roof, hitting the side, the solid wall of the house, and so you're not going to have what we call all that sun going in, because this solid roof is going to be able to ensure that inside is going to be cooler. And by the late evening sun, it is hitting the solid wall. We are saying, and you need to understand, students, the importance of aligning the house in what we call the east to west direction. It reduces the buildup of heat inside the house. And so the animals will be able to produce, and they'll be able to do very well, put on the weight very quickly and ready for the market if you're talking about the broilers. So A is the correct way for farmers to build their house. So farmers out there, pay attention and make sure that your house is aligned in an east to west direction. Let us look at another house. This farmer, he builds his house in a north to south direction. So we want to understand the solid walls are now facing north and south. So what you're having on the east and west side is what we call the area that you have the mesh wire and where we normally put up what we call our tarpaulin or the feeding bag to act as barricade. So we're looking at this house this morning. The morning sun is going to come up from the east. It's going to hit this house. It will go straight into this house because there's no solid wall to prevent the sun or to reduce the impact of the heat. By 10 o'clock sun, everything is right inside this house. From as early as 10 o'clock in the mornings, these chickens would now start to pant. They're going to be very hot. They're not going to be interested in eating. They are going to now want to drink water. By the midday sun, it's on the roof. This house is already very hot. And at this time now, they are drinking a lot of water and they are not eating. By you talk about the 2 o'clock sun and the evening sun, so for the entire day, this house is going to have a buildup of heat. This heat is going to prevent the chickens from eating as much as they should. And these animals is not going to put on weight as fast as these animals that are in the house that is aligned in an east to west direction. So do you understand the importance now? Good. So it's very important, farmers. Do not build your house, and students, in a north to west direction or orientation, but in an east to west direction. And that is done not only for broilers, but also for layers as well. We now want to move on to look at ventilation. When we talk about ventilation, we're talking about how air is going to circulate inside that house. It's very important. And that is why, for example, the broiler house, we are giving them those mesh wires, right? Because we want air to circulate inside that house. Good? When we have good ventilation, it is going to disperse the heat and the foul odor that is going to come from the house. Now, if you don't have good ventilation, students, when you enter your broiler house, you're going to get a good, strong scent of that ammonia gas rising out of that litter that is there. Good? And then you're going to realize that it is going to affect you as well as your neighbors. You also need to what we call ensure that air is circulated so that your animals are going to do well, especially when your house is oriented in the right direction. Good? So what we have covered so far, students, we have been looking at the requirements of how we are going to build our farmhouses. We have looked at the purpose. We have looked at the materials. We have looked at roofing. We have looked at orientation and ventilation. So we want to move on now to look at other requirements. Remember now to pay attention because it's very important that you understand as I go through the lesson. Good? And so the next requirement we want to look at is lighting. Lighting, students, is very important. In the daytime, we want to use natural light, the daylight, as much as possible. It's very important because we have to now pay attention to our expenses. We don't want to be burning electric light during the day because we are looking at to make sure that we are able to make some profit. So during the day, we want to encourage you to use your natural light, but at night, the electric light is very important and necessary because good lighting is going to help to keep away the predators from your house. Good? And so the next one we want to look at is what we call predator control and security. In our Caribbean region, farmers suffer a a lot from predial larceny. People just decide to just prey on them, go in, just when they're about to slaughter their animals, the animals are gone. So we want to make sure that we have secure fencing around our houses. If you're going to put on a padlock, don't just put on a little flimsy one. You want to make sure that it's a good one, you have quality, that you can secure your animals and you can put them in proper pens. Good? If you're going to do your wire mesh, like for your poultry and rabbits, make sure that it goes straight up to the walls of the ceiling. Floodlighting is very important too. You want to place them at strategic points around the building. And remember that we must make sure that we keep away stray cats, dogs, vampire bats, mongooses, rats, and thieves, because we want to make sure that at the end of their lives, we'll be able to make good money. So what we have looked at so far, students, we have looked at the purpose of having a house for our animals. We have looked at the materials and the type of materials that we use. We have looked at roofing. We have looked at orientation. We have looked at ventilation. And we have also looked at predator control and security. Is it clear so far, students? Good. I hope that you are taking your notes as well. And so the next requirement we want to look at, and this one is key. This is where many persons fall down in terms of house requirement. It is sanitation. Remember, students, animals cannot look after themselves. And we are the ones, because we are managers, we are practitioners of agriculture. And every agricultural science student, you have to now learn to manage. When you go into your house, you have to ensure that your house is clean. And there are certain things, we build the house in such a way to facilitate this. So what we normally do with the floor is always rough to facilitate easy cleaning and sloping a little. Good? So that we can get out all the wastewater and the effluent out of the house. Good? You must have what we call a channel inside your house, for example in your piggery, for speedy removal of effluent into a slurry pit or the biogas digester. And you also want to make sure that you have appropriate pathway for the removal of solid waste to the manure heap. These things are very important, students. If you do not want to go into your house to clean your house, your animals will come down with disease, and it's not going to be good for us as farmers because we are going to be losing money. You can't have a good start, and because you don't want to clean the house, you're going to lose so much. So we need to pay attention to that. So for example, in your piggery, you want to clean at least twice per week. And people like to think that pigs are dirty. They are not. If you give a pig a room, they are going to divide that room into different areas. They're going to have their dining room where they eat. They're going to have their bathroom where they're going to pass their waste. They're going to have their recreational area where they're going to just wallow and just have fun. And then they're going to have the area where they rest. The problem comes in when we do not practice good sanitation and we allow all that waste feces to be all over the place. It does not make the animals happy. And so if they are not happy, they'll not produce as well. Is that clear, students? Very good. And even for our broiler house as well, you want to make sure if there are wet areas in that house, you want to take that up and to add some dry litter into that house to make sure that your animals are doing well. Good? The next point we want to look at is safety. And when I talk about safety, I want to look at biosecurity first. When you have your farm out there, or your farmhouses, make sure that you don't accommodate anybody off the street to just walk into your farm and walk into your house. We have to make sure that the animals are safe and protected. So what we are saying to farmers and students at school, sometimes it's difficult. If you're not able to get what we call a ready-made foot bath, you can make your own. So you must have a foot bath at the entry points to the pen. Yes? Grill covers must cover your drains, and channels and pits must be there because you want to be able, as you clean, you're able to allow this air for your waste to run down and make sure that the place is also safe. You don't want to leave it where it's very slippery and then you're going to slide and hurt yourself. And when we talk about exits, you must have several wide exits for speedy removal of farm animals in case of emergency. For example, if there's a fire, You don't have to say, let me drop this one on my back. You're able to move them quickly out. If there's flood, you can move your animals quickly out as well. So pay attention to these things because safety is very, very important. And students, even you sometimes raising your chickens at home. So when you come onto the school farm, you then have to put your feet into that footbath, leave everything there, and then you go into your house. Because we don't want what you have at home in your fowl house to be in the ones that we have at school. Good? Very good. And so we have just wrapped up, students, the requirements that we need in order to build a farmhouse that will provide protection from adverse weather conditions and also from predators. Remember, students, many predators are out there, but we want to make sure that our animals are safe. So do you understand now? Housing for farm animals, and all these things are critical and very important, especially orientation. Let us move on now to look at housing for broilers and layers. Now, when we construct our house, we're talking about the house must have at least what we call 10 meters wide and a conventional length. But for us at school, we are thinking of what we call the standard width. And we're looking at what we call 300 centimeters or 3 meters in width. Good? When we talk about our roof, we can use either aluminum or zinc roof. And you want to also make sure that the eaves extend to about 1 meter to keep out rain. Good? You want to have what we call a brick wall from the floor up to about 30 to 40 centimeters high to retain litter in a deep litter system. Good? We want to also ensure that you put up your barricades using your feed bags or your tarpaulin around the house, and the doorway must be at least 1 meter wide, and there must be sufficient ventilation inside that house so that your animals will be able to produce and to do well. The requirements for the housing is very important. And you must ensure that if the time becomes very windy and cold, you have those barricades there. You can go and use the feed bags, sew them together, or get the tarpaulin where you can take them up in the day and you're able to lower them at night. These things are very important for the well-being of our animals. Because inside your house, students, you're going to have your brooding taking place. Your brooder is going to be there. If the animals are too cold, the baby chickens are going to huddle together and they're going to die. They're going to be sleeping, getting warm, and they just die. If inside the house is too hot, they're going to move away to the perimeter of the brooder and they're not going to be eating and drinking. So the temperature inside the house, based on the orientation, how you build the house, have a lot to do with how we are going to control temperature in the house. Not just for our broilers, but also for our layers. Good? So what we have looked at so far are the requirements for the farmhouse. We have looked at housing for broilers and layers. We now want to move in to look at the systems under which we raise our broilers and layers in our region. And we normally look at, when we talk about systems of production, we have what we call the intensive system. That means the animals are in a house. We have the semi-intensive system where these animals, they are outside in a yard during the day, but at night we take them in and we lock them away to make sure that they are safe. And then we have the extensive system, like how we have the common fowls at home. They can run about in the yard and they are able to fend for themselves. Good? And so now I want to look at the deep litter system. Once we talk about the deep litter system and we use the word litter, we are referring to putting material on the floor of your house so that when the chickens pass their waste, it will be absorbed, the droppings will be absorbed by the litter material that you have on the floor. We use many different types of litter materials, students, in our region. For example, we use wood shavings, we use bagasse, we also use rice hull, we could use dry grass, we could even use shredded newspaper. All of that is litter material that we can put on the floor. When we put the litter down, it must be at a height so that we'll be able to store it, so it will always remain dry inside the house. So the depth of that litter material would be about 10 to 15 centimeters on the floor of the pen, or you could go up to what we call 6 inches, 4 to 6 inches. Good? Once you have that, you know that you're at a good place with raising your chickens. The litter must be stirred once or twice per week. Sometimes you're going to have some leaking waterers. If it's leaking and the area becomes very wet, you want to get your spade and bag, go into that house, make sure that you put your foot in, make sure you clean yourself there with a foot bath. You don't take anything from outside inside your house. And then you're going to spade that up, take it outside, then you're going to get dry litter to put there to ensure that your animals will be doing well. If the litter becomes very wet, students, the chickens can come down with a cough. They will get a cold. They'll cough and wheeze and sound almost as if they're asthmatic. And if animals are sick, they will not produce and do well. So how we look at the house and take care of the house is going to be very important, what we are going to have at the end of the time when we need to slaughter them. Spacing is very important as well. You want to space the broilers, for example, 4 to 5 birds per meter square, and for layers, 3 birds per meter square. And if you're looking at the picture here, you're seeing that this is a deep litter system for layers, and we are saying that the perches must be there for roosting and nest boxes for egg layings, as you can see what they are doing there right now. And you're seeing the amount of space they have, because the layer stays a longer time in the house, up to a year, over a year, so they must have good spacing inside that house. Litter is looking quite dry and healthy, I must say. Good? We're now going to look at the next system under the intensive system of raising our broilers, and we call that the battery cage system. We are placing the chickens, or these layers, into little wire cages, sometimes 1 bird per cage or up to 4 or 5 birds per cages. And sometimes the cages are stacked one on top of each other. Some persons think that this system is unnatural and cruel. So let us take a look at it. So these are the animals in these small cages. You're going to have their feeding trough. It's going to be on the outside that they can eat. And then when they lay their eggs, it's going to now roll down into what we call this area right here, so that you can have easy collection of the eggs. And then underneath the wire cages, you want to put a tray there to collect all their waste. But most persons prefer to use the deep litter system and not the battery cage system. Students, what do you think? Which one do you prefer? I prefer to, like you, the deep litter system. Good? Now, there's something that we need to work out, students, and you must do this for your CSEC examination. You need to know how to work out the space requirement for broilers as well as layers. And so once we talk about space requirements, students, if we know the space requirement for 1 chicken, 1 broiler or 1 layer, then we're able to work out the space requirement for any amount of layers we want to raise inside our house. And if we are going to raise chickens, we need to give them the proper spacing. If we overstock these broilers, for example, it's going to affect how they're going to produce. You want them to have enough space to eat and also to drink. So when you're going to raise chickens, you want to put, for example, 1 feeder to 25 chickens and 1 water to 25 chickens. So spacing is key inside your house. Let us now look at the space requirement, and I use this example for 75 broilers. So we know that this is a space requirement for 1 broiler, 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters, which would give us 900 centimeters square, or 0.09 meters square. Because we know the spacing for 1 broiler, we can then work out the spacing for 75 broilers, 100 broilers, or whatever amount you're raising at your school. So we are now going to say 75 broilers multiplied by the spacing for 1 broiler, which is 900 centimeters square, would give us 65,500 centimeters square, or if we're working with meters square, it would have been 6.75 meters square. So it's not so difficult. This is a standard. Once you know the standard, you can work out the space requirement for your chickens. Now, students, we now want to work out the width. And we need to work out what we call the length, because at school, we are using a standard width of 300 centimeters. So we know that area is equal to length times width. We know the area already. Good. We know the width already, standard 300 centimeters. And so what we now want to find is the length. And so we are going to put the total of the area over the width in order for us to get the length. Good? And as you can see, we worked out it and we were able to get 225 centimeters for the length, as shown here. And so when you go back to do the maths, 300 multiplied by the 225 centimeters is going to go back to give us the area for 67,500 centimeters. Would have been the space requirement that we're going to need for 75 broilers. You can now work it out now at home for any amount of broilers you want to raise. Let us now move on to look at the space requirement for our layers. As I said before, students, the broilers are in your house for up to 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes we take them out at 5 weeks based on the weight and what your markets require. If your markets need your chickens at 3.5 pounds, you can take them out at 5 weeks. However, even though broilers are staying inside the house for a short time, you must understand that layers are going to require more time, and if it's more time, it is going to be more space. So now we want to be able to look at the space requirement for our layers. Good? And the space requirement for one layer, this is standard 0.9 meter by 0.9 meter. We're going to get 0.81 meters square, or we could get 8,100 centimeters square. This is a space requirement for one layer. So they need more space than the broilers. Good? So once we know the space requirement for one layer, we can work out the space requirement for 40 layers. And when we work that out, we are getting the 40 layers by the one space requirement of 0.81 meters square. We now end up with 32.4 meters square. We could convert that to centimeters, and we have 324,000 centimeters square. We do the same thing as well to work out the length. We know the standard width, 300 centimeters. We're then going to divide by the area to get our length. When you multiply them again, you're getting back the same area. So you want to make sure you can check to make sure that your answers are right. So you're doing that to work out the length, just to make sure that the information that you have there is correct. Not difficult, students, but it requires practice. Good? Very, very important. So what have we looked at so far, students? We have looked at the requirements in order for us to build our farmhouses. Good? We have looked at the housing for broilers and layers. And if we are going to raise chickens, we need to know how many chickens to put in a space. And so we have just worked out the space requirement that is required for our broilers and our layers. Is that clear, students? Good. And I'm glad that it is clear to you. Sometimes we may decide to overstock. If you're carrying out an experiment for your SBA, you want to maybe overstock or understock, because sometimes we want to know how stocking density is going to impact the weight that chickens put on. And students, you need to try these experiments and carry out your comparative studies for your SBA. So try it, get the same space requirement, you can understock or overstock, and then you can let me know. Because you and I know that if chickens have a lot of space, they're going to run up and down and lime. They are now going to convert their fat into muscle. The less space you give them, all they are able to do is to eat, drink, and to sleep, and then they'll be able to put on more weight. But carry out the experiment, and you let me know what is best for your chickens. More space or less space? Good? And so we have wrapped up chickens, and now want us to go now to look at rabbits, because rabbits are very important to us now in the Caribbean. Good? They are easy to raise, don't cost a lot, and the meat, the quality of the meat is very good. Very, very tasty. So once we talk about housing for rabbit, students, we want to make sure that we are raising those houses about 3 feet off the ground. We want to make sure that they are protected from predators as well. And so once we make the house, we then must also pay attention to orientation. The house must be aligned in an east to west direction. Good? We want to protect them from, make sure that we have the proper roofing. We want to have the sides solid and also the back. We want to take off some of that northeast trade wind as well. And so to the front, we're having what we call these wire meshes so that you're going to have some amount of ventilation taking place. And then you have your door because you want to make sure that your animal is safe. So the hutches must be well ventilated. They must protect the animals from adverse weather conditions and also from predators. And then also the floor is going to be mesh because you want the air to circulate even better. So that when they pass their waste, it is now, you have what we call a tray here to collect their feces. Bear in mind, students, that we must have what we call a sitting board inside the hutch. Because you and I know that rabbits, they eat their night feces in order to get more nutrients. And that is what we term as coprophagy. So the board must be there so that they can re-eat their feces at nights. Is it clear? Good. So students, we have looked at the broilers and layers. We have looked at the rabbits. I want us now to move on to look at pigs. And once we are going to build housing for pigs, we have to make sure that the pigs are also well protected and that there is air is circulated inside the house as well. But before we move on to look at pigs, I want to recap with you by looking at a past paper question. And I don't want you to only try to answer multiple choice questions. You have to be able to answer those essay type questions as well, especially for the students if you're doing single award or double award. So we are looking at a past paper question from paper 2, which double award students and single award students will be able to do. So let's go through the question. In the Caribbean region, broilers are reared in poultry pens where heat buildup can be substantial during the midday hours. The diagram represents a typical poultry pen. Study the diagram and answer the questions below. Let us study the diagram, students. What we're looking at the diagram, we are seeing now the orientation of the house. And I know you can tell me the orientation. Is it east to west or is it north to south? Yes, it is north to south. And remember what we say about the orientation of the house. We are seeing the roof, slightly sloping roof. We are seeing the eave extend out to about 1 meter. We are seeing the low solid wall. We are seeing the door. We're seeing the footbath because we want to make sure that we are protecting the animals inside. And we are seeing the wire mesh. This house is saying that it is not oriented well, but we are seeing ventilation. Good? Now, it says suggest one way of improving the design of the pen to reduce the buildup of heat. And what we are going to do, we are making sure that the house will be oriented in an east to west direction. And you want to now explain how this design in terms of orientation, east to west, will be able now to improve the design of your house. Now, students, that is it for today's lesson.